There's opportunity to build your research portfolio, expand your skill set, and possibly produce a product that can become a game changer. Industry partnerships within the academic community have had mixed reviews over the years. Research funded by traditional resources such as NIH and NSF have been the mainstay for many seasoned research faculty, but the federal funding environment can no longer support the research enterprise in the same manner we have grown accustomed to. Sustainability of our research environment will require alternative approaches to funding resources. To help us consider other options, we have gathered a panel consisting of an up-and-coming university researcher, as well as seasoned research facilitators. Facilitators who have been on the industry side, starting up companies, and have worked to establish research partnerships through licensing and sponsored research agreements. Throughout the process of exploring the skills needed to build our culture at ECU, we've gathered great advice from previous sessions, such as dare to be different. Free resources are good resources. Use your passion to get to reality, and there are experts on campus that are here available to help you. Today, you should hear that industry partnerships are a valuable tool in your toolbox as you begin to translate your project into productive outcomes. Helping us deliver today's message on partnering strategies are 4 outstanding panelists. First, we have Marty Van Scott on the end. Marty will serve as our discussion facilitator today, and many of you will recognize Marty as the MC of the previous Idea to Impact forums. Marty serves as the founding director of ECU's Office of Technology Transfer. Her path to technology commercialization began over 30 years ago when she served as an assistant geologist for an underground construction project in Rochester, New York, and later in designing coal mines in West Virginia. She transitioned to the U.S. Department of Energy and learned valuable skills in federal court and property management before relocating to Research Triangle Park to serve as a federal contracts administrator for industry. Upon relocation to Greenville in 1991, Marty shifted to grants management with ECU's Office of Sponsored Programs, where she was charged with all grant and contract activity at the Brody School of Medicine. Throughout her time at ECU, Marty has served sponsored programs in a variety of capacities, ranging from grants manager, assistant director, and director of sponsored programs. Upon founding the ECU Office of Technology Transfer in 1995, Marty leveraged her experience in grants administration and contract negotiations to build a tech transfer program that straddles the line between research and economic development. On the research side, OTT facilitates negotiation of agreements for industry-sponsored research and the exchange of information and materials among academic and industry researchers. On the economics development side, OTT assesses inventions for commercialization opportunities, secures intellectual property protection, such as patents, and licenses these inventions to companies that range from multinational pharmaceutical firms to biotech companies and new startup companies. Next, we have Bob Fick. Bob is a physician by training, having graduated from Northwestern University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University. Recently retired from Merck Research Laboratories, Bob looks back to nearly 20 years in escalating roles of translational research leadership in industry that began with Genentech as a staff clinical scientist and transversed to group leader and director of experimental pathology and preclinical pharmacology with DNA-X research to senior director of experimental pathology and pharmacology and discovery medicine at Schering-Plough Biopharma. Then as head of respiratory and immunology strategy of the biologics division of Merck Research Labs until his retirement in October 2013. His breadth of research and development experiences includes development and oversight of research plans, including target validation and discovery biology for novel targets, creation and implementation of preclinical predictive sciences group and translational medicine program, including murine and primate models of human autoimmune and respiratory diseases, respectively. He serves as a member of research leadership teams, guiding lead selection and design of bio-better protein therapeutics, providing competitive advantage for Merck Research Labs. His senior management experiences include establishing effective department organizations, designing and recruiting core labs, and managing new science departments to meet the needs of a growing biotechnology enterprise within a global pharmaceutical company. Bob has successfully established productive working relationships in a highly matrixed organization, bicoastal across preclinical functions, inter and intra-therapy area franchises, and with extramural academic and biotech collaborators. Bob's intersection with ECU research began years ago while practicing medicine and collaborating in the research at the University of Iowa with Jim Mettensker. For those of you with a long history here at ECU, you may remember Jim Mettensker as a leading clinical researcher in respiratory medicine. I'm sure Bob will share more with us during the discussion how his relationship with Jim evolved into a long-lasting relationship with ECU. Next on the panel, we have Roy Carter. Roy is the Senior Director for the development of the Marine Biotech Center of Innovation, one of several centers of innovation launched by the North Carolina Biotechnology Center. Roy has over 25 years of diverse life science research and development and technology commercialization experience. More recently, Roy worked as a consultant helping university tech transfer offices evaluate and commercialize new life science inventions, and private clients translate technology platforms into new business sectors. Previously, he was Director of Biochemistry at BioWarn LLC, a biosensor company focused on bioweapon detection. He established and led biology, chemistry, and technology application teams before becoming its Chief Scientific Officer. He then co-founded Bioemics Incorporated, a startup to apply the biosensor for point-of-care diagnostics. Prior, he held a staff scientist and project leadership position at Novartis and Syngenta, initiating new projects in agricultural biotechnology for insect-resistant crops, animal feed, and cellulosic biofuels. Roy completed 2 postdoctoral appointments related to molecular genetics and cell biology of cancer, including development of novel live cell imaging methods. He received an undergraduate degree in applied biochemistry from Liverpool Polytechnic and earned his PhD in genetics from the University of Nottingham in England, where he is recognized as an early pioneer in the development and application of DNA fingerprinting methodologies for use in ecological studies of wild birds and animals. And last, we have Dave Brown. Dave Brown is an associate professor of physiology at the Brody School of Medicine. Dave received his undergraduate degree in exercise science from Virginia Tech and his doctorate in integrative physiology from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Following a postdoctoral fellowship in molecular cardiobiology at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Dave joined the faculty of ECU in 2008. His laboratory focuses on cardiac electrophysiology, spanning the level of intact heart down to isolated heart cells, and further down to the powerhouses of the cells or mitochondria. A major question of focus for him is how does the metabolic state of the heart influence the activity of cardiac ion channels and vice versa? There is increasingly strong evidence that activity of cardiac ion channels can influence the susceptibility of the heart to arrhythmias, infarction, and mechanical dysfunction. Upon his arrival at ECU, Dave quickly became acclimated to industry-sponsored research by partnering first with Galeon Pharmaceuticals, then with Stealth Biotherapeutics. It was through these relationships that Dave successfully leveraged nearly $800,000 in industry-sponsored research into research grants from the American Heart Association and the NIH. In addition to an R15 award based on highly meritorious research, he was awarded an R56 award that later transferred into an R01 award. All of these awards are from the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Now it's my pleasure to turn over the program over to Marty, Bob, Roy, and Dave.
And so I thought I would ask our panelists how you got into this. And let me start with Dave first, because Dave, you're firmly footed on the university side of the fence, but yet you've reached over onto the industry side, and I think have had some successful partnerships. So tell us, kind of walk us through how you got to there and why it was important to you.
Sure, Marty. So for me, I I think through networking, I had made a couple of contacts that ultimately resulted in some industry work. As a young guy, when I first got to ECU and started setting up my research lab, really the first why was because it brought some funding into the laboratory. Work with industry usually starts quicker and ends sooner than a traditional NIH grant. And as a young guy, I found that it was a good way for me to quickly try and generate a little bit of revenue to help me kind of get up and running for the, for the greater lab that I was trying to build. So I got into it just through some contacts. So I think networking helped me get my foot in the door. And then that working with industry let me stay in the house because we understand their needs. We try and do everything really quickly. And so I think my initial relationship has turned into a long-term relationship with one company in particular. So initially I thought it was a great opportunity just to get up and going off the ground, and actually would not have predicted that it would have evolved this way over the course of the last 6 years.
Bob, you're on the other side of the fence. Your career is a long-standing career, is firmly footed on the industry side, but you've had a very long track record of partnering with academia. Maybe you can talk with us about how you got to that place, and then maybe how you connected with ECU.
Sure. I have two answers to the why. There's the greater answer, and the greater answer is a collaboration, a broad collaboration between academics and industry is the best, I believe, strongly believe, the best means to an end. And the end is what we've all signed up for. As MDs, we sign up for relieving suffering, treating disease, managing patients, and I think the best way ultimately to achieve that is new therapeutics, new managements, new ways to manage patients, testing the way we currently treat patients to make sure that in fact they're valid and indeed useful, and as a PhD, rigorous advancement of knowledge, right? And the best way I believe to do that is to go where the best expertise and techniques and tools are available, and in almost every instance, they don't exist exclusively in your own lab. Even labs with hot and cold running graduate students, a dozen of them, still are lacking on something to efficiently, expeditiously, reproducibly advancing their research. So that's sort of the broad answer to that. In my own case, I was in industry. I had a job of identifying new targets and translating those targets, and a wide variety of tools are needed to do that. And here at ECU, there happened to be a predictive animal model, primate model, a non-human primate model of the disease that was of interest. And those animal models here at ECU, or other models existing at other academic institutions, allowed me and our research groups to test pathways, pharmacology, and one can argue about the positive predictive value of animal models, but it's unquestioned, it's unequivocal that the pharmacology in those animal models is useful. The pathway identifying nodes is useful. So that's the broad reason why I think all of us should be interested in collaborating across academics and industry. And it's specifically how I got into a collaboration that lasted. It was very profitable, productive, 6 years, I believe. You can tell me because you managed it. But I think about 6 years.
It seems like we've known each other that long, or maybe longer.
Yeah.
We've been on the university side and how it's benefited Dave. We've been on the industry side and how it's benefited the work that Bob has done. Roy, you're right on the fence. You've been startups, you've done industry, and you've counseled universities and helped them evaluate their research and the outcomes of it that might be patentable. So tell us about what life is like being on the fence and how you got there.
It's fun, okay? So my role, especially now, is to help facilitate interactions between academics and academics in different disciplines and bring them together, or industry with industry. So an ag biotech company with, for example, a genomics company, sort of bringing them together. And then it's also academics with industry. So it's my role now is to try to identify what are the strengths, what are the opportunities within the university system, and match them with what the needs are for industry. So from both sides, I'm trying to find out what you may be working on and other opportunities that could be used. You work on mitochondria in cardiac, in electrophysiology. When I was at Syngenta, I was in this group called Insect Control, and they do I didn't do it, but others did electrophysiology of insect cells because that was the mechanism for killing them. And those sort of non-obvious applitions of your technology that's where I try to help bring those together. And then from industry side, we're trying, especially large industry, they have the big companies, they have so many projects ongoing, they don't know who is out there. So our role is to talk to a big Fortune 500 company, find out what are their needs. I know somebody that can do that. I'll introduce you. And that's what we're trying to do. And it's fun. I get to, my real interest is new technology and transferring it into new areas of research, being the first to apply it in something that's fun and sexy, and just thinking outside the box beyond the really narrow confines of traditional academic or industry research.
So we kind of covered why
Yes.
why industry,
Yes.
university partnerships are good. Let's go into the what here. What are the ingredients of a successful academic industry partnership? You've all had experiences one way or another. I think Roy and Bob have had many experiences. Dave, you've had a few. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think helps?
I think if I was going to identify anything, for me, it's been very clear communication on both sides about what the expectations are and what the deliverables will be on those expectations, and then execution of that. So I think for me, the most important part to maintaining our good relationship is a constant and clear communication of what they want from us. We understand what we need to give to them, and we're also on board in terms of the timeline in which that needs to happen. I think that's the biggest difference for me of working on an NIH grant versus working with industry. There's a time component and a speed that has to be there with industry that is not necessarily there with the NIH. If I miss a deadline with one of my industry partners, it could cost me the relationship. If I miss my NIH deadline, I'm just going to hit the next one 4 months later, and that just might cost me a harder discussion with my department chair or something like that. So I think for me, the communication has been the really important part. What do they want? What can I do? And then how do we execute on that plan?
So Bob, you've been on the other side. And so and you've partnered with many universities, I imagine, many organizations. What kind of ingredients help achieve a successful partnership?
I think there are many components. Dave mentioned one or two. So different components, while those are important, for me it would be a couple. One would be the scientific expertise that starts there, right? You have to have the science and the expertise. So the science is a published track record and a principal investigator or two who are who look forward to working with you and embrace your proposal. So it's science, publication record, track record. And then the second would be sort of a boring part of it, but it's a reality, and it's what you deal with in your office and have helped a lot, Marty. And it's contracts and the legalese side of it. that can really slow a blossoming relationship between industry and academics. And there are, rightfully or wrongfully, there are some institutions, unnamed, that have a reputation of just being really middling. And just it takes months, 6 months, 8 months. And as I said earlier, in fact, the pace of development within industry is very rapid and much faster than I spent time in labs at Yale and the University of Iowa and Stanford, and then moved to industry, and I was aghast at how quickly things move along and decisions are made to continue programs or stop programs. So because the pace is there and it's fast within industry, we can't spend a lot of time with the contracts and grants. So I think scientific expertise, principal investigator who has a track record in the area that you have an interest in, joint mutual interest, and then the grants and contracts piece of it.
Mm-hmm. And I would say transparency is a big part. It's really kind of, you don't want to work with a company that's taking all of the data and not sharing the value it's creating for them back to you. And from a industry point of view, you don't want to be working with a PI that's telling everybody about this brilliant new results that they've got that has been sponsored by a company. So really, it's the whole communication, the transparency, that's all very, very critically important. And working and managing the relationship. You've got this great plan. It's never going to happen the way it was planned. So it's making sure you communicate changes from both sides as quickly as possible so you can make adjustments.
I think that transparency is super important. I can emphasize that from my experience as well, Marty, that I think I would say that the days of the unrestricted research grant from industry to a principal investigator in academics are numbered. It doesn't happen anymore. We did that less and less over the last 5 years that I was at Merck and DNAX. But more often now, the bio clusters, right, or institution-wide collaborations where industry scientists are shoulder to shoulder, and if they're not, they're virtual sometimes, but research in progress, right, Friday lab meetings, right, are something that I grew accustomed to, right? And I can't remember the last time I was part of an unrestricted research grant where it was opaque, right? You just gave the money and then a year later checked to review the draft of a publication.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dave, you've seen both. I'm going offline now. You've seen both sides of that because you've got your NIH, which is less restricted. I mean, maybe not unrestricted, but you're working in the focus, and then you've kind of had to balance it because of that valuable data you got from your industry partnership. Do you feel a bit schizophrenic at times?
Absolutely, yeah. Schizophrenic, and also it's a little difficult to manage at times. You know, if you're mentoring students and they're working in a field where you think they may be generating, you know, data that could be valuable to the company, you know, it's oftentimes, well, does that mean if I buy reagents for that project, you know, which fund should it come from? So there's schizophrenia, but also a little bit of confusion at times, quite frankly, when you run the lab, just in terms of what you're after for the federal dollars is sometimes there's overlap between these areas, and that for me has been an interesting thing to try and learn how to manage.
But it's not a problem, right? Because I hear it's synergy, which is good. And that's exactly what you want in your lab, and the graduate students want, right, Dave? And it's, of course, what industry wants. They've come to you because you have a track record in an area they're interested in, and it's a natural, the collaboration is a natural synergy. So it's good too.
Yeah, I think it is. It's just sometimes, there are things that you just can't do with federal dollars, trying to just sort of logistically manage a lab that does that has been one of the more interesting learning curves for me.
And you bring up a really good point, because as a recipient of federal dollars, if an invention occurs, we have a duty to report to the federal government and follow certain processes and procedures. And I think many times inventors or faculty members say, well, we came up with an invention, but that was not the goal of my grant, so it's not reportable. And as far as the federal agency is concerned, if you use federal dollars, if you've got a research technician whose salary is covered by the grant, although they may have worked on the industry project, those federal dollars flowed over. So now we have an obligation to report under Bayh-Dole. It's not a bad thing. It's that management
That's right.
process. Going offline again, in my field, in the field of technology transfer, our industry recognizes the greatest amount of success is not how much we as administrators can partner people with industry. It's the partnership between our faculty member and the industry scientists. That's what makes it work. Can you comment on that from your experience?
Yeah, I think that is a good metric. That's ultimately, I think it's, I'm thinking, Marty, how do you actually record that? How is that quantitated? What comes to mind are publications, but that's not, I'm sure you can illuminate us as to how you would quantitate it. But yeah, ultimately it is that relationship and the productivity, the efficiencies gained, as opposed to not collaborating, right? The industry and academic lab working along, chugging along at their own pace, you achieve a definite efficiency in your collaboration. So I agree, it is that relationship that's very important. I think, I guess, Marty, you're also opening the door that maybe others can comment on it. It takes, I guess, a certain type of academic investigator willing to truly share data, share bench space, share techniques, and it has to be more than just looking at a research grant and funding, and maybe a publication. And so maybe some of the difficulties that we've all experienced in these collaborations might come because it wasn't truly altruistic. It wasn't truly, for the reasons I said at the beginning, to rigorously advance knowledge, right? It was, I just need money to pad my accounts here at ECU.
So, a couple of thoughts. So, first of all, not all faculty should be allowed to work with industry. There are some people there very insular.
Right.
A relationship with industry is very much more collaborative than is traditional within academia. Even within a company, you're part of a big team working on a drug or an ag biotech product, and you have lots of support from scientists doing individual technical processes, and you're working with, you may be a project leader and have 3, 4, 5 people working formally for you, but there's another 50 or 100 that are touching your project in one way or another. And because of that, that's how the relationship between industry and academia should be working. You should be having the truly collaborative role, and obviously some faculty, obviously nobody here, but some faculty are probably not willing to do that. So that would be one thought. One other factor is on successful collaborations is identifying where the boundaries are. Where does the academic research and early translation sort of mostly stop, and when does it become primarily a research activity of the industry, and when are they really sort of taking over, and defining those boundaries is probably an important thing to think about early on.
That's a really interesting point, Roy. In our office, we have what we call a product pipeline, where we identify all the different projects that have commercialization potential that we're managing. And then we kind of identify what stage of development they are. Many of our projects are health or medically related, so the pathway is very long and complicated. But the first part of it is the discovery phase, and then it marches along until commercialization. And we color code our pipeline to show people where we are in the development pathway of each one of these projects. And I can tell you that every one of our projects is coded in bright purple in discovery. We are really good at discovery. We have very few of the other steps colored. They're kind of blank because that's not our skill set. So let's talk about what kind of skills industry can offer us to help get our projects, which are really good in discovery phase, to move them forward down that translational path. Do you have any experience or offers on
that completely resonates with me, Marty. I think maybe 10 years ago I would have said, okay, if I've got a disease and I've got a drug and I've got a model of that disease, if my drug works to cure or improve the outcome in that disease, then there we go. Then I can buy my beach house and my house in the mountains, and that's just going to be that easy. One of the interesting things, though, I think, is that you find that if a discovery phase thing is successful, then it just kind of goes up to the next tier where toxicity issues start to come into play. You have to start to learn about what the IP landscape is, and even if a molecule works in a disease model, is there enough IP around it that it would be interested for a company to put all the resources behind it and continue to develop it? Is it something that can be manufactured in a reasonable cost? So I think for me, as you sort of start to learn more about those things, you realize how much it takes. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I would say 99% of the things that work in a lot of our animal models really don't ultimately translate into a product, just because the road is so long. I think in terms of what the industry can offer, just the experience with what are the ways to look at toxic effects of compounds and dose dependencies and all of these kind of things that we've found helpful with our experience.
Listening to that, Marty, it occurs to me that I'm going to use schizophrenia now again, but it's in a different way. Okay. There's a certain schizophrenia there's a dichotomy, really, that occurs with this heavy discovery cachet here. And it's that, on the one hand, that's exactly what industry is looking for, right? One of the trends, along with the 1980s and Bayh-Dole, encouraging, catalyzing university intellectual property and development of that, commercialization of that. The other trend pushing academics and industry together has been the externalization of research and closing of R&D facilities within major global biopharmas. The most famous of that, in my mind, is Pfizer and Groton, their research center in Groton, Connecticut. It's a wasteland there, and they've gone to spending hundreds of millions at major academic centers. The relationship between Pfizer and UCSF in San Francisco is a good example of that. That's a biocluster, and they've put their scientists, rather than Groton, Connecticut, they're in the labs for 6 months in San Francisco at UCSF. And so that externalization of research is one of two major trends that have fostered, catalyzed collaborative collaborations between academic and industry. The dichotomy comes in is that while on the one hand industry is pushed to collaborate and look through all of your purple files here at ECU, on the other hand, Roy alluded to this, there's Dave did, there's a certain jaundiced eye industry gives to new discovery. And I think actually it's sort of part of the scientific method, right? All of us should do that. We don't read the New England Journal of Medicine and immediately start practicing that way. You look at it and go, that's interesting, but I wonder how that really translates, right? I wonder if that really holds up. Or drug of the month in the Lancet, right? We just don't practice that way. Same with basic research, right? Industry will take, if we're good at transferring information from ECU to industry, they'll take that and maybe repeat some of it, maybe repeat all of it, see if it holds water, if it's repeatable. So that's there's sort of a yin and a yang there, right? Where industry is driven to look for academic relationships, but on their hand, having found them, then they go, ooh, maybe we got to be a little more careful about this. Right? Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The point about repeatability is interesting. And I think that, and Dave, when we were talking and preparing for today, you talked about consistency and quality and such. I think that in industry, at least in the pharmaceutical and biotech world, if something is going to translate into a product down the road, it has to meet certain quality standards that meet a regulatory metrics, say FDA. And I don't know how much our faculty are necessarily trained or groomed in that way. So can you speak? Maybe Roy, you can start and speak to that. That, because I guess it would have to be repeated by industry to start down that standardized path.
Yes, absolutely. And there are statistics about how many actual publications are even reproducible. There are many papers where somebody's discovered something and they're actually not using the cell line that they say they were because they've made mistakes on all of this. So there's a lot of that going on. The other big factor is from the rush to write papers. This is the academic requirement. You get a new result, you publish it straight away. You don't necessarily repeat it another 400 or 500 times to see, does it always happen? Why it doesn't? You may drop out a few. Well, I know why that experiment didn't work. I can ignore that one. Not saying it's deliberate fraud or anything like that. But the magnitude of an effect may be much less when it's been reproduced many times. And that's the requirement in industry. They're going to have to take this data all the way through and invest for a drug. This could be $1 billion, more than $1 billion. You don't want to start on some fuzzy data in the beginning. So.
I think the phrase trust but verify has definitely been representative of my experience. The other thing that we found is that a lot of our studies are in smaller animals. And at least in the heart, there's a certain punch or a certain validity that comes with larger animal models of the heart that may more closely resemble the humans, but yet it's not. Those aren't animals that would traditionally be used in basic science studies. So what we found with one of the compounds that we worked with is that we saw efficacy in rats and mice, and then it was trust but verify, and that verification actually came in larger animal models that have a better track history of predicting translatability from the basic science side into a clinically relevant population. So that's certainly been our experience as well. That, okay, that looks good. Let's see if it's real or not somewhere else.
So was it? So I'm dying to know. So some rodents.
Yeah.
To industry's larger animals.
In this case,
was it in this case reproducible?
It was. So in this case, this was a company that didn't have their own wet lab space, so they just contracted out with other academic centers that had some larger animal models going. So it was tested in rabbits, dogs, and sheep, and also the efficacy was there. So whether that even goes to the next level, we'll find out.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah, it's underway.
At least from my experience in the tech transfer world, our goal is, and it sounds cruel, but it's true and honest, it's better to kill a project early than have it a long, languishing period of non-productivity. And I believe that's a standard in industry, because we all cannot continue to expend. You have more financial resources than we do, but nonetheless, you cannot continue to expend money on a project that is not going to be productive.
That's right, Marty. By all means, it's the same mantra in industry. It's kill early, because Roy mentioned the $1.2 billion of direct, indirect costs to take a target through a compound, through clinical trials to approval. That's direct and indirect costs, $1.2 billion as of 2010. And so probably more today. But that's across the entire pipeline, right? So yeah, you want to kill early. It occurs to me, just to spend a minute, that there's the interesting tug about killing early is that, and it's no different in industry than in academics, is a bias is there, right? It's really hard to kill. You kill one of your babies. It's a new target, you discovered it, and in looking at a rich data set, which we should all be using, not a limited, selected data set, but looking at a rich data set, one is really able to, it's easy, really, in almost every case, to find a trend towards positive. You can select out and pick and go. If we just repeated the experiment with a few more animals or different species and dosed a little differently, I think I could pull those out. And so it's a post hoc analysis. And industry leaders, my bosses, really, again, were very skeptical, and there was a high stringency, and they could see through that. But I tried, and I'm sure people here at ECU do that too. It's really, it's a type of bias.
As I think about our discussion here and how you've interacted with industry, Dave, and you all have interacted with the university, tell me a little bit about exposing students and postdocs to this kind of research. It's a different form than your, traditional what you've been brought up and maybe in your graduate school days. So is this something that would benefit our students and postdocs? Should we pursue it?
Absolutely. So I think about this all the time. So I mentor students, and based on the odds, about 15% of the students that we graduate with PhDs will actually do the academic research lab seeking federal funding, 15%. So that means that 85% of our students won't, but we train 100% of our students to kind of do what we do, to write NIH grants, to publish papers. So one of the things that we're constantly trying to figure out is how can we broaden the training of students here at ECU to give them the skill sets that provides them with more options. It's a double-edged sword, because oftentimes if a student comes across a compound that's a new compound, if it's got some potential for IP, Marty, as you know, that you don't really want to get it out there in the public domain, and yet they're gauged for their own candidacy by their publications. And so it's a tough thing to have to struggle with, of holding the data for IP reasons versus getting out to show productivity. What do they have to kind of show for it? But we do try and get the students that work with me to network as much as possible with the industry partners, just so they can build their network. And so we're trying to train them for careers besides just how do you write the perfect specific aims page onto your R01 proposal. So I think it's important, and maybe as a part of the discussion later on, we can think about what can we do additionally here at ECU that puts us in an even better position to train our students for a spectrum of careers, instead of just that learn on the feet as they go once they get out to the industry.
I have some ideas about that. Maybe we could spend a minute doing that now.
Yeah.
So why not put, during the course of your lab collaborating with industry, Dave, why not actually for a week, 2 weeks of picking up a technique or some method, put the graduate student in the academic lab. Just travel, and they stay, and just go to an academic lab, go to an industry lab. You're in collaborators lab
Yeah.
and spend time there. So they're in the milieu, and for a short period of time.
It's a great idea. Can we formalize?
Have you
like
done that? Does that happen?
Not to the extent of actually having them go to the labs, but I have, kind of taken them out.
Then
to
there's
see
the
more.
formal, of course, a postdoc. You can
Yeah.
just do a postdoc in
Yeah.
industry.
Or formalizing some sort of internship program that we could have for our students. Maybe we're geographically, maybe we're a little isolated in Greenville, where we'd be slightly more of an advantage at closer to RTP, but I still think we could take more advantage of that close proximity to all of the power that's in the RTP area. And so that's a great idea. What are the things that we can do to make this a more formal, productive thing that we can do for our students?
So do you think that, so we're talking about how, but do you think that ECU graduate students, PhD, MD students, MD research students are aware that there's a rich life of, it's a dirty word, directed research, but directed is, I'd like the opportunity to talk later about how broad that directed research is and how well supported that directed research is. But do you think ECU students are aware that there's this whole other career path?
I think that the short answer is no. I don't think that our students, they don't know all the things that are out there because there are so many possibilities, that it's kind of hard to bring it in. I think, so Dr. Yika Varag's here actually, and she made a remark one time that was really telling to me when I said, I think we should do more to get our students with insight into industry. And she said, yeah, but who would teach it? So it's also difficult for those of us who get into the academic system, like how do we have the skill set to really, and the qualifications to really educate our students on everything else is out there when we're doing, kind of what we're training them to do. So I think opportunities to bring in outside people would be really helpful. But by and large, Bob, I don't think that our students are fully aware of all the things. And the other thing is I think there's still a perception of industry as the dark side. I've had students, I had a PhD student who she just didn't want to work in academia, and she was afraid to tell me that because she thought I would perceive it as going to the dark side. And maybe there's still a little bit of a cultural bias among faculty. Maybe that's not fair for me to say, but I feel like maybe there's a little bit of a, I'm disappointed that person decided to go and be a sales representative for a big pharma company instead of, go for the postdoc and the K award, then the R award.
But I wasn't suggesting sales reps. Now that may, joking now, tongue in cheek, that may be the dark side.
Yeah.
No, I was talking about a bench scientist in industry, right? I mean, you do the same thing, only you're just better supported, probably in most cases.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you're somewhat told that this is your project, the same way as you sort of tell your students this is your project. Instead, in a big company, it's the director tells you this is your project. You don't get to choose your own projects to the same degree, but you're still in charge of your own project.
Yeah.
So.
And that project is necessarily exactly what you're trained, what the student, the graduate student, the newly minted PhD is trained to do. Otherwise, it's a foolish director in the industry, right? Assigning something that someone's ill-equipped to without the background. So it's directed research, but it's directed to exactly what your talents, where your talents lie. And I don't see any problem with it at all. But maybe during the Q&A, there'll be people here who can illuminate me or argue with me.
Valuable question. I'm glad I brought it up because. I think also in my conversations with research faculty who are mentoring students is they need to make sure that the student achieves a certain academic rigor. And I know that our faculty take that very seriously because when they come out with that degree it has to mean something. So it is kind of interesting trying to balance, what projects does your student work on. If it's industry sponsored, we don't want them restricted in their ability to publish. And we as an institution won't allow that to happen. If a patent needs to be filed, we'll file it like that. We'll work with the company and get it filed very quickly. We have time for about one more question. We've had some great dialogue here. But I wanted us to explore a little bit. Bob, you've talked about the concept of these bioclusters. And then there's, I think that different companies or different organizations have resources available where they're trying to figure out how to get universities to come to them more often. So we talked a little bit about Caliber out of California. Eli Lilly has their Open Innovation Drug Discovery Program. Recently, we've had some communications with Syngenta for their Thought Seeders program. And I learned a phrase from Roy,
Okay.
network by proxy.
Yeah.
So maybe you can kind of walk through this in our last few minutes about these kinds of resources, and should, and if so, how should we take advantage of them?
Okay. Well, when I said network by proxy, I mean that's really my job. Is I'm meeting faculty. Primarily in the marine biotech. My old background was in ag biotech. I'm very interested in the technology generally and transferring it across major disciplines and sectors. And I go to a lot of networking events with industry folks, and when I hear some industry saying, oh, we're working on this, or we've got this problem, then my job is to say, I know somebody that might I can introduce you to. So that's what I mean by networking by proxy. So
you're our friend.
Yeah, exactly. But then you were talking about Syngenta and their thought seeders and things, especially the ag biotech companies. They are the big six. There are 6 global ag biotech companies in the world, and they have pretty much all. They do everything themselves. I mean, there isn't a huge academic research like there is with NIH. So they're taking the ideas from academia. They're very open to open innovation. They platforms where they tell you what things they're interested in, and as academics, you can say, oh, I may be able to kind of help with that. And you can get an idea of what their real needs are. When you're working in academia, you kind of think, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's going to be worth $1 billion. Industry, especially the bigger companies, they're taking a multi-decade global view. They know what the real problems are and what technologies are out there that may be able to solve it or not, but they're open to new ideas. So it's kind of very important to kind of communicate with these companies to find out, does what I'm doing, does it have an effect for your company?
What's the question again? That was networking by proxy.
That was
and
a bit of open innovation. Yes.
Getting your foot in the door.
Yeah.
How do you
basically.
get your foot?
Yeah, some companies have programs.
Yeah, they do. So I've already alluded to institution-wide grants. That's at the level of a chancellor and dean of research and the president of a research institute like Merck Research Labs. So, working together on those. But at an individual level, I'll follow up on the Caliber idea. So Caliber is yet another relationship at a very high level, very rich level between industry and academics. But it's not the large, heavily funded Pfizer money going to UCSF or Johns Hopkins, right? It's setting up an institute. Merck spent $100 million and brought Pete Schultz from MIT, and lately at Scripps, brought Pete Schultz to head up the California Institute for Biomedical Research. Caliber is the acronym, and that's a competitive not so dissimilar from the NIH, although it's focused on new targets, so that all those purple files in your office, Marty, should be looking towards Caliper to file a single-page application, like you would start with an NIH grant, and to see if you're competitive. And the Schultz and the people there, independent from industry, but supported by Merck, provide all the critical review and then the approval to fund a selected number of grants. And then all of the translational tools needed, very rich tools and techniques there in Torrey Pines. And the new targets, the basic research discovery and innovation here is very quickly, again, the reference to industry's pace, quickly translated to the next level, first in man, through animal models, toxicology, pharmacology, et cetera. So that's Caliber, and it's something that's open to all ECU investigators on a competitive basis, but life's competitive, so that's sort of the way it is.
And I think if I've learned anything from the competition that I've been exposed to of trying to run a research lab, it's just be persistent. I've been told by companies, no, we don't want to do that. The majority of the grants that I've written for a variety of funding agencies haven't been funded. So I think that if I can identify anything in terms of, what can I do, I would just say the persistence, I think, is really the key thing. I mean, if someone tells you no, then fine, but keep going. I've even been told no by one of the companies that we worked with, and then a year later, hey, you know what we should do? We should do, and it was kind of, yeah, well, I guess you thought about that a year, So I think the persistence thing is just, don't be afraid to be told no, whether you're working with industry or whether you're submitting an NIH grant, just keep going, I think has been if I can say, I don't think that we've necessarily been lucky in the proposals that we've been able to get, but I think it has been because we've just kind of kept our head down and kept trying.
And that's interesting that you say that. I'll make one last remark before Carlisle goes into Q&A, but that persistence is what we're hearing from our innovators, and I see Sharon sitting over there, and I know that she's one of our most persistent faculty, is to just keep going, because I think they've been told no for a variety of different reasons, and sometimes it's because whoever says no doesn't really understand. At some point, we do need to kill the baby, but but is it really a no, or is it a keep that persistence going?
And it's important to do your homework. You have to know what their problems are, so that and propose your solution in a way that makes sense to them. You can't, depending on who you're talking to, you can't expect them necessarily to take that leap that's in your head on why this should be the greatest thing since sliced bread. So kind of think of it from their perspective. Why should they want to work with you, and explain it in that way? So.
Good point.
Your discussion has focused, and rightly so, on more biotechnology. Can you share an example of a partnership between social scientists and industry?
I can't do one yet, but we're hoping to do some. So a program that NBCOI is very interested in or technology area is aquaculture. And we wish to make aquaculture a much more substantial industry for North Carolina. And one of the things we're going to be doing in the reasonably near future is trying to develop an economic impact study for how aquaculture and everything related to aquaculture would benefit North Carolina. And there's no way on it I could do that. So we will be finding economists, and we will be explaining the broader aquaculture industry, whether or not it's seafood processing or using the waste material to turn into a biopharmaceutical, or a technology for cleaning up water, which could also be used in some other industry. So we're going to try to capture all of this technology and then ask somebody that knows what they're talking about to try to understand the economic impact if all of that was in North Carolina, and what would be necessary to bring that to North Carolina. So that would be an example. We just haven't started it yet. So.
I can think of an example. I had to go back in my memory bank, but I could think of an example of a professor who in psychology, and he has an expertise in studying patients with implantable cardiac assist devices. Not in so much on how the devices work, but how it affects the psyche when the darn thing goes off when it shouldn't, and how it scares these people. And because of that expertise, he is the go-to person with Medtronic, Boston Scientific, St. Jude, who want to know how can they reach out better to their patients. And so he's built a whole body of research and travels around the world as a guest speaker, and has developed some really interesting apps that the industry has taken an interest in to help improve the quality of life of their patients.
That was going to be my answer to it. It took me a while as well, Marty, but I went back to my memory bank. And I was going to say, prior to Marty's comment about quality of life, that in fact, that is, so measurement of quality of life. So this is a part of social science, but it's metrics, it's the quantitative part, it's tools and instruments that are validated, and that's a whole career right there. And for different diseases. I have a lot of rich familiarity with quality of life for respiratory questionnaires, and we used one at Genentech to flesh out the full therapeutic effect of one of our ultimately approved respiratory drugs, a biologic. We used quality of life and tools, and I know that in another type of collaboration between academics and industry that we've not mentioned at all, I'll just get it in here, are consortia, right? So that's often federal, FDA, NIH, as well as academic and industry consortia around a disease. And I've been on those consortia for COPD, for example. There are multiple COPD consortia, and they all include social scientists. In fact, there's a whole section at the American Thoracic Society of Social Scientists, and that'd be something that questioner would be, if they're interested in lung disease, to explore. And yeah, industry will make use of those tools. Quality of life is a knotty problem, but very, very important to biopharmaceutical companies in phase 2 and 3 testing.
All right, the next question is for Dave. How do you balance working with industry in the tenure process?
Well, let's see. I just went through that. I got tenure last year. I think the things that helped with the industry were they started working with me, and I knew that having the publications was important to the industry, so they could go back, look at the models and the things that we do. So. Continuing to publish, I think, is starting to publish, I think, really got me in the door with them. And then they also, they got to the place where they wanted to start and get some of the data that we were getting with the compounds out into peer-reviewed publications. And so, in some degree, things like publishing was good for me in the tenure process, and it was also good for the objectives of the company. There, the balance comes in that you have an extra step if you want to submit a manuscript of needing to make sure that everybody signs off on what's in there and which is written into a lot of the contracts. But so I think publications is certainly the big thing. It is tough when the other criteria for tenure come in, like teaching. All of us run into this with there's only a certain amount of hours in the day, and so time management, I think, always comes into it. How do you balance everything?
The teaching would be, of course, you're maybe making reference to formal coursework and class time and pedagogic podium stuff, but certainly your lab work, teaching graduate, teaching lab schools.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the lab time, and industry helps support your lab and feed ideas and work together, and so that's the teaching. Plus, I can think, I was a tenured faculty member before I moved to industry and had collaborated with industry, just as you do, Dave. And so part of the criterion that I ticked off with my industry experience as well was the international reach, right? I mean, usually at the associate level or full professor, you certainly need the full professor probably. You need to demonstrate at most institutions an international reputation. And one way of doing that is to travel widely and speak, you know, and be a part of international groups and consortia again. And industry makes that possible. I
Sure.
did that with industry support.
I have as well.
Yeah. So.
You mentioned agreements are a vital part of the industry academic partnership. What agreements do we need to get the conversation started? Or do we need an agreement?
You know, Roy and I were talking about that before the session started. Quite often, faculty want to share their ideas with industry, and so in our office, we're all about confidentiality agreements, so we come up with one. Industry's quite knowledgeable about confidentiality agreements. They're generally very simple. I call them plain vanilla. If you've seen one, you've seen about all of them. So you can start that dialogue with just having a simple confidentiality agreement in place between university and industry. Roy, on the other hand, had some different thoughts on that.
Yes, sometimes the confidentiality agreement can get in the way. A company, they already sort of have a good idea of what you may be working on. They've read your publications, and they're talking to 5 or 10 other groups working in the same field. They kind of want to listen, but they don't want to be overly contaminated with details, because they may not want to work with you. They want to, they may already have this information themselves. They may have already heard it from somebody else, and that all gets into complications later on when you say, "Oh, I told you that." No, we already knew that. So so they don't want to. At the early stages, it's a communication. You're just chatting before you kind of get into too much detail from both sides. So that would be my thought.
I think it's, I mean, this goes back a lot of years for me, but it's almost like dating.
Yes.
Before you get married, you date and you start with a conversation. And then you start to get more comfortable, and then maybe more willing to share more information. And then that's maybe when the confidentiality agreements come into play. Is that what you
That makes
kind of
sense.
found?
Yeah. It's a good metaphor.
Good dating. I do want to mention, though, that faculty are not authorized to sign agreements. So come to the university and we'll help you out with those.
All right, we have time for one more question. What does it mean to each of the panelists that ECU has now become a millennial campus? And for those of you not familiar with millennial campus, that's a designation where you have a specific location that sort of helps to improve partnerships between the university and industry, government, and military partners.
I guess I'll take the lead on that. Millennial Campus is a designation that the state of North Carolina allows the public institutions to request that designation. And what that does is allow the institution more freedom and flexibility for industry, public-private partnerships, relationships with industry and such. So many of you are familiar with the Centennial Campus on NC State's campus, which was in essence the first millennial campus in North Carolina. And that allows industry to set up shop on the state campus and allows students to partner with industry to be embedded in some of the labs. It opens up a lot more flexibility. So I think it takes away some of the concerns that we have with other state laws, such as Umstead Act, and really allows us much more freedom for this kind of collaboration. The millennial designation ECU is getting, our goal is not to set up a giant campus like Centennial. They've got 4 or 5 different designated areas on campus and across town that are being designated millennial, and we'll either be able to build space where we can partner together and in the case of the medical campus, it's the entire health sciences campus. That includes the medical school, dental school, Heart Institute, allied health, the nursing school, that whole campus and space beyond, which we don't have buildings there, which will allow industry and university to partner together. So it's possible that we could have industry, we could have Bob or some of his other companies come and have a lab right next door to us.
I see. And where does the money for the bricks and mortar, the first model, or buildings around town, where does the money for the bricks and mortar come?
That's a really good question. It's my understanding it's bonds. It'll be
State, I see.
bonds, and that. But we have to get the designation first, and before we can go out and get the bonds, and before we can bring the resources in. We've only just been approved for millennial designation 1 week.
Wow.
Board of Governors last week, and
That's why I didn't know.
in fact it was last Friday.
I don't feel so bad.
Yes.
I didn't know. It
And
sounds very exciting, Carol.
It's
It
got
sounds
it's got great opportunity, and we do have some spaces identified to start to launch out. But it was really interesting that even within 1 day of the approval of the millennial designation, is companies were calling ECU, saying, "How can I partner with you?" So I think this is a huge opportunity for us to really launch more of these partnerships.
This may be a too technical question for the audience, but I'll throw it out there anyway. Will that change contractually the overhead costs that companies would pay? And you know the reason that I'm asking, because some places, I think more private universities, will give industry a discounted indirect cost rate, and as a public institution, we can't really do that. But that's one of the things that we've run into, is that if they want the same thing done in 2 places, but one of them they only have to pay a 25% overhead cost, and the other they have to pay, say, 50 or 60%. That's one of the issues that I think that I've run into is, does the Millennial Campus, will it still be the full kit and caboodle that they're going to have to pay for the NIH negotiated rate, if you will?
I'll just be honest, I don't know the answer to that question entirely. I know the Millennial Campus Act is a state act. What we charge in F&A, or indirect costs for those who aren't familiar with it, is a negotiated rate at the federal level. So it's a really good question. I can imagine that if industry is leasing space on ECU's campus, then what can happen with the F&A rate may be, there may be some flexibility. I don't know for certain. But if they're not leasing space on campus, then I don't know that it will change. Good question, though.
Please join me in thanking Marty, Bob, Roy, and Dave for an engaging discussion about industry partnerships.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks also goes out to Research and Graduate Studies, Office of Innovation and Economic Development, ECU TV, Aramark, and the staff of OTT for today's forum. We could not offer this series without their commitment and support. Our next forum is scheduled for noontime on Friday, May 15th, and we'll explore SBIR and STTR grant opportunities available to small businesses and university researchers who partner with small businesses. Those scheduled at the end of the semester, we please encourage you to come and join us. We have a great lineup for the program. Leading off will be Debbie Hathaway, Assistant Director for the ECU Office of Small Business Technology Center. Next, we'll have John Uvari, the SBIR STTR Program Specialist of the North Carolina Small Business Technology Center, followed by Chris Dufferin, a research faculty member from the Department of Family Medicine who has successfully partnered with small business to receive SBIR support. And rounding out our panel will be former Senior Vice President of Drug Discovery for GSK, Ken Batchelor. Ken is currently CEO of Novatarg Therapeutics, a company with a proven track record in securing phase 1 and 2 SBIR grants for drug discovery. So please join us. Thank you.